Sorry, I don't own a fedora, or else I'd totally have it on right now. How many of you have... okay, if you're clicking this video, there's a pretty good chance you're familiar with the series and the game and everything, and you're just waiting for my opinion. I thought the game kinda sucked. I thought the story was pretty awesome. There you go. Boom. For those of you not, way back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was kind of a wave of FMV games. I don't mean games with FMV. That's actually a separate thing. I mean FMV games. And I was like, oh, this is kind of a terrible concept. But I thought this was going to be kind of a sort of a trend. And it was, and then it died out horribly as everyone just kind of decided to switch into the new thing, which at the time was CGI, which has never stopped developing, basically. And I mean that sincerely. You know, you look at Reboot, the television show, and that's kind of what really proved the viability of CGI as a thing, along with a little movie called Toy Story. Between those two things, CGI took over, and this kind of FMV footage just kind of became a niche thing. We did get Contradiction just about 7 years ago, I think, at this point, something like that. And that was kind of cool. I haven't actually played that myself, but I'm aware of it and I've seen it. And it's a game that's on the list, so hopefully someday we'll actually play it on camera. But I was walking into this game expecting this to be an FMV game. It's not. This is a game with FMV. The distinction is an FMV game is a game that is fully FMV, and that's kind of part of the gameplay. Whereas in this case, what we actually have is a game with separate gameplay where the cutscenes are done with full motion video. Now, there's no shade being thrown here. I wasn't expecting that. I happen to rather like games with FMVs. After all, I'm a big fan of things like Wing Commander, or Command and Conquer, to use two examples right off the top of my head. Also, Control did this too, if you're paying attention, and consequently Max Payne while we're on the subject. So I'm with it, right? So, why didn't I care for the gameplay? Well, while this game doesn't fall into the big problem when it comes to these kind of pseudo-adventure games, which is, you know, you need this piece of gum to make this piece of wood tie to this sock so you can use it to catch this bird, which when it falls is going to walk into this piece of paper, and it's going to make a hole in the paper so that the ant falls into the paper and goes down here, calling the anteater over, which takes with it a bunch of dirt, which allows you to use the dirt to plant a plant or something like that. I'm not good at making those up on the fly, so forgive me. I should have just actually gone through one of the real ones, because I've played Longest Journey. But anyways, we're playing The Dig tomorrow too. That should be fun. Anyways, it's not as bad with that, but it still has grains of that periodically, so that's not cool. And, well, the thing that it does right on the gameplay axis, which I'll start with, is, first of all, it has a built-in mode that is just kind of a ignore the game if you want to mode, which I actually really like, believe it or not. The way this works is you have a flashlight, which does nothing. It's terrible. It's your typical bad video game flashlight, except that if you have this mode on, it'll highlight something that you can loot or interact with, which is actually really helpful, especially when you're just like, oh, I don't know how to progress, and you could just go and look forward. There's also a built-in hint system, which is also pretty awesome. And it just flat out tells you, go here or do this and that, and you can click individual goals. So you select what you want to hint for, and you don't have to read the whole thing. You could just say, well, if I'm stuck at this point, what do I need to do next? Boom. This is a form of in-game information. It's effectively a walkthrough in the game, and that's actually awesome. Hang on, it gets even better. There's also an option to just straight up skip the puzzles. Now, I only did that once because I'd figured out the puzzle and it was taking too long, and I'm already at the point where I should have eaten about an hour ago, and I should be going to bed in about 20 minutes. So I'm way into my day. So I was just like, all right, here, I figured out the puzzle, let's go. But the most important part about all these things is you're thinking, why is it good to skip all these? Is it's purely optional. And it's not a big thing. It's not like some games where you can turn the gameplay off completely and just play through. It is site-specific. If you're having problems at one thing, if you don't like one particular puzzle, if you just want to get on with it in one specific level, that option's available to you. And that's actually pretty awesome. The puzzles themselves are okay. Most of the puzzles are puzzles. So to explain that a little bit, so we already talked about FMV games. You're probably thinking a puzzle game like Portal, right? No. There's two very big broad categories of puzzle games. And the easiest way to describe it is by saying Portal and Myst. I was confused if it's Myst or Myst. So it's Myst. Right? Myst is, or there's actually a game I covered a few years ago. which I looked up the name of a bit ago. The Witness. That was it. The Witness. That's a puzzle game. That's a game where you wander around the game and then you play a puzzle, it's a freaking puzzle. It has nothing to do with the game. It has nothing to do with anything. You're supposed to do a little brain teaser and then you progress, right? By contrast, something like Portal, the game itself is the puzzle. Something like a Zelda game would also qualify as that kind of a thing. It's a different category, right? I tend to prefer those over puzzle games. I suck at puzzles. I freely admit that. I did need help a couple of times, like I just referenced when it came to this game. And there were a couple of puzzles where I didn't even understand the rules, so I'm just staring at it like, random click mode. But nevertheless, the puzzles are reasonably well designed and they're reasonably well intimate and everything's kind of cool. So what's the problem with the gameplay? Everything else is really the problem with the gameplay. The intro has some issues. The outro is actively kind of bad. The game barely feels like a game at times. There's a section where you can walk through a corridor and a giant lightning thing comes through and kills you instantly if it hits you. And you go to a game over screen that you can't skip through that I was aware of. And I say it that way because there might be a way I didn't figure out. And then you get dumped back to your previous load. Okay. But the thing is, the hitbox, or I guess I should say the hurtbox on this thing is actually very inconsistent. And this isn't an action game. It's like trying to do really precise platforming in Prince of Persia. No, the original Prince of Persia. And it just feels like they've tried to twist the game into something that it can't quite do at several sections. That's only one of them. There's also the fact that a huge amount of the gameplay is spent in doing what is effectively just padding, walking around the basic hub area, which is not very impressive graphically and not very impressive audibly. And you get the idea, right? The gameplay axis is mostly a bunch of not negatives and not positives. Just a whole bunch of wash, right? But the things it does bad, it does pretty bad, and it was pretty frustrating at times. And I don't really have much else to add to that. I want to check something. This is going to get bright for just a second. Oh, God. Because there was something else I wanted to mention specifically. That's right. So, there's also there's actually two other pretty big problems. First of all is the font size. This is a weird complaint to mention, but some of you who've been following the channel for a while know that we've had this issue many times before. Several game designers just don't seem to understand how to do proper font scaling. We had this problem with Octopath Traveler, to use a specific example, but this has come up several times. The font in this game was so tiny I had to do this at multiple times. In fact, I literally ordered a $5 magnifying glass for the next time this comes up, just to spare my eyes. No fix for that. Nothing I can do about it. But, at least not within the game itself. So that was a ding. But the other thing is the weirdest thing. So the closest thing to what I would call real gameplay in this game, other than doing the puzzles, is the dialogue options. You know, similar to how I would consider one of the main gameplay aspects of something like Dragon Age Origins would be the dialogue options. That determines the flavor of what happens and how your cutscenes go. And in this case, it also determines your ending. How text interacts with people is down to your dialogue options. So that's a core part of gameplay. Not every time, but I'd say about half the time, we had very severe Tor effect going on, or Tor syndrome, more accurately. And for those of you who have never heard that before, it's actually surprising because it's probably one of my most well-known phrases off the channel and off the show itself. The idea is when you select something, and what comes out of your character's mouth is absolutely not what you thought that dialogue option was. And in this case, they were just nonsensical song references in some cases. And in other cases, I just found myself randomly guessing. When I first met Holly, for example, at the hotel, I was like, all right, well, let's pick some options that are just trying to be, just trying to get a light-hearted mood going and be positive. And I ended up being a total dick to her and actually insisting that she wasn't a real person. This is not what I intended. And unlike Tor, there's no backing out to fix that. So that sucks. But you're not here to talk about the gameplay, you're here to talk about the story, which ironically I have very little to say about, except they did a pretty damn good job with this. Oh, don't mistake me. Speaking as someone who's worked on my own projects at about the same level of caliber as this, I can point out every single flaw. I'm sure the people who made this can too. There are two actors, I'm not actually going to name whom, who I feel didn't really do as good of a job as everyone else. But for the most part, we had some really good performances, some really good oomph, some really good presentation. I want to talk about some of the little things. Let's talk about Louis. Louis's awesome. He's actually probably one of my favorite characters in the entire game. He's just relatable and affable and fun, but more to the point, the actor playing Louis is probably one of the most high quality actors in the game. In fact, I'd say that he's probably the second overall highest quality actor in the game. He does a really good job with his role. And they also did a couple little interesting things. So he has some makeup on to make himself look like a mutant. Okay, what's the big deal here? So his makeup doesn't look what you would call super photorealistic, but it looks like theater makeup. In a good way, if that makes any kind of sense. Like, if you pay attention to it, this is also true with Clint at the Ritz Motel, your place. You could tell that actual thought and effort was put into making sure the skin color lined up. Making sure that my alarm just went off, because that's my go-to-sleep alarm. I told you, it's a little late when I'm recording this, sorry. Effort was made to make the skin tone work, to make sure that it blurred properly, to make sure that it looked like it was part of him, even though it kind of didn't. But the thing I was most impressed by was the makeup was clearly something that was going to be shiny under the lights, right? So what did they do? Is they very carefully did a diffuser light and only had their main, I forget what the term is, but they had a primary light that was actually under him, under into his right, I believe, pulling it up this way, so that he didn't have that kind of glare going into the camera. Now, I met Louis very early on. He was like the second character I saw. And immediately after that, I started paying attention to the lighting. And lo and behold, whoever the lighting director on this game was actually really good at their job. They did a lot of subtle things to make sure that the lighting was very well designed. In all cases. Probably my favorite examples are Clint. Not Clint, sorry. The Count. The Count de I'm Evil, who was sweating because he's wearing a large amount of stuff under studio lights. In makeup and all that. So, nevertheless, they put a good deal of effort to make sure that his skin looked uniform as you were looking at him. There was no gradient or attempts to try and make it so that stood out or anything like that. So it looked better than it probably should. And the other one was Rook, who wears glasses. There's actually a lot of work that goes into making sure that glasses don't have a glare when you've got lights going right into them. I'm not sure the exact angle. I think it's somewhere around here-ish. You should actually see that glare, but of course you don't normally, because I, too, have actually studied lighting and tried to make this whole lighting setup as good as I possibly can. And it's just really cool to see that level of detail. And after I noticed the lighting, so I noticed the makeup, then I noticed the lighting, and I started noticing all those little details. They're on green screen most of the time, and if you're paying attention, you could tell, and then other times it's extremely obvious. But nevertheless, you can always tell that someone, somewhere, more accurately, several someones, were doing their jobs properly. For all of the little niggling details, like some of the action scenes are kind of silly and some of the transitions are kind of ridiculous and the death scenes sometimes aren't even there, the actual core meat of the game, the cutscenes, the FMVs, were spot on. Were actually very well designed and had legitimate professional craft to them. And I just wanted to give my hat off, you know what I mean, to them and to the team who actually worked on this. Some great stuff overall. I also wanted to mention Murphy himself, even though the character is not someone I was super fan of, because he's a 12-year-old and I'm just not into that. But he was nevertheless very well acted. The actor himself did a fantastic job and did some good voice work throughout and knew how to use physicality in the scenes. He was good directing going on. I wanted to give special mention to the other two actors who really jumped out at me too. The gentleman who played Mojo was awesome. In fact, he is the best actor in this work. I don't know his name. I meant to look it up. I apologize. But he does such a wonderful job. He's only really relevant for the one small story arc when you go to him to get the thumb key or the thumb key. Really, Laura? I know you're tired. I still haven't had dinner either. The thumb drive decoded. And that's his only real story significance, and then you have to go get the freeze gun for him. But nevertheless, he nailed his performance. The tone, the physicality, the tempo, the timing, the pacing, but he also did something else that almost no one else did. He memorized his lines. I know that sounds like a weird thing to point out, but almost every other character didn't. Virtually every other character, I think there's only 3 exceptions to this, had a teleprompter right there. Now, I don't know how many of you are able to see this, but I'm actually not looking at the camera right now. I'm looking right next to it where the teleprompter would be. One of the things we started doing throughout the game is we started paying attention to how obvious it was, because it's a sign of a good actor to be able to do that and just not really make it super obvious and maybe make it part of a movement like I just did there. So you know how I kind of shifted my entire face over here so I can look over here for a moment, read in the middle of a line, and then look back at the camera. You know, little stuff like that you learn. Like I mentioned, Louis earlier, his actor, he did a really good job of that. You had to really be paying attention to see him grabbing the teleprompter. And then sometimes it was really, really obvious that they were looking over at their lines over there. But not the guy who played Mojo. He just knew his lines and he nailed them. And I have to give credit to the third actress who did a really good job, which is the one who played Taylor, who was obviously having a lot of fun with her role, which is something else I wanted to mention. Obviously, she just absolutely adored her role and absolutely nailed her role and is awesome in general. Possibly my favorite character. I'd say maybe my favorite or second favorite is Taylor. But, along with Mojo, if you're wondering, and Louis. Those are like the big ones. Not just because of the acting talent. The characters are cool too. But I also want to mention that just about everyone involved, even the people who weren't as high quality of acting talent, were obviously just having fun with it. They were obviously just throwing themselves into the role and cheesing it up. Especially Alistair playing the villain. Can't forget to mention that one. Everyone was just kind of embracing it. And that's awesome. It's always nice to see this kind of a passion project. It has its holes. It has its flaws. It has its cracks. You can destroy the entire planet in this game. Not a joke. I actually did it on camera just to show it off. But it's very clear that this is a work of passion. I've said this so many times that I don't really have hard evidence of this, but I have always believed since I was very young that if you care about what you're doing, if you want to put out a good product, if you have that kind of passion, enthusiasm, positivity, etc., that you will put out a superior product, especially if you have backing. And I feel like this is a good example of that, which brings me to my big point. God, I wish we would get a sequel to this. It's been a couple of years. It's been about 8 years-ish since this came out. And I did a little bit. I didn't have a lot of time, but I did like a good 10, 20-minute look, and I couldn't find anything about a potential sequel, even though it leaves like 5 plot threads dangling, and I mean, it's kind of an awesome game in general, and that's a damn shame if we never get a continuation of this. But you probably expect me to talk about the story. I guess I could. I could talk about it. This is a Bond film, except it doesn't star James Bond. James Bond is suave and intelligent and cunning and crafty and knows how to work his way around things and is generally a top-tier individual, a high-level person, if you will. Murphy is a level 0 commoner. That is not an insult. This is a James Bond film starring a level 0 commoner. And again, not an insult. It's part of the wonderfully unique tone that the game has, because you're just a nobody. I mean, he's got some brains and he's got some charisma, but not really, It's more like he rolls well every now and again, and the rest of the time he rolls crap, because his stats are crap and his everything is crap, and he just kind of bumbles his way forward, right? But that works perfectly. The fact that he ends up saving the world from some psychopath he's not a psychopath or a sociopath, from some insanopath, it's a new word, you can use it, who is trying to destroy the world in order to ascend humanity and mix with the afterlife, which is apparently real in this setting. Sure. But instead, it just comes across as almost cartoony, but in a good way. One of the things that was mentioned multiple times on stream was Looney Tunes. At one point, we take out this extremely powerful and dangerous security system by dropping an anvil on it. And that's the game in a nutshell right there. I don't know what else to really add to that. I could talk about the Tesla section and how it's just absolutely nightmarish horror out of absolutely nowhere. Good Lord. I could talk about how the game doesn't really resolve some of its threads to significant satisfaction. I could talk about how there's some interesting world building going on about World War III and the radiation and the fact that holograms are still trying to get rights. However, mutants have recently gotten rights, which they didn't before. There's all sorts of stuff. It does also apparently do a pretty good job of connecting to the previous games. Obviously, we see the cutscenes and stuff in occasional snippets, but the game is actually a direct sequel to the previous Tex Murphy game, which is awesome in several ways. A very brave and very interesting choice to go with. I probably wouldn't have done it if they couldn't have got the original actor back, but they did, so here we are. Maybe that's why there hasn't been a sequel? I don't actually know. I need to take over the world just so I can be like, here, could you make another Tex Murphy game? Here's some money. Go make another Tex Perfect game, right? I did enjoy myself, if it's not obvious. I enjoyed the shtick. I enjoyed the cliches. I enjoyed the humor. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the performance, the lighting, the makeup work. How often do I get to talk about makeup work in this job? This is worth a ride. And if you haven't played it, you can play it with that it's called casual mode. You can just play it and just kind of enjoy the game at your own pace, as you wish to. Tomorrow we're going to play The Dig, which we will have no such quality of life features and will die horribly many times. I have no idea. I'm not actually sure what it is other than a point-and-click adventure, so I suppose we'll find out next time.